This is the story of the darkest nights in the life of a hero once thought to be invincible. Behind his red and blue mask, Peter Parker hides not just his identity, but also the wounds, guilt, and fears he's never shared with anyone. For years, he protected New York from criminals, monsters, even versions of himself. But tonight is different. Tonight, the city that never sleeps feels eerily still. Too still. The streetlights remain lit, the occasional taxi hums by, but something unseen creeps behind the shadows. Peter has felt it since the sun began to set, a cold that comes without wind, whispers only he can hear, and a sinking dread clinging to his spine like a wet web. People start to vanish, not from crimes or accidents, but as if swallowed by the night itself. A child from the apartment next door doesn't come home from school. The shopkeeper who always greeted Peter disappears without a trace. Every trail he follows leads to silence, to strange echoes, and to one thing that chills him to the bone. Glowing cocoons hanging in the dark tunnels, each containing perfect replicas of real people, including one that looks exactly like him. Meanwhile, the dreams begin, not just nightmares, but vivid, horrifying visions. Mary Jane falling into a black ocean, Uncle Ben, silent and bleeding, himself smiling, but with hollow, empty eyes. Each time Peter wakes, he's drenched in sweat. His bedroom wall is clawed. These aren't dreams, they're warnings. Something is hunting him. And it's not a villain, not an alien, not a monster he can punch. It's older, deeper, closer. An ancient entity whispered of in half-lost texts. The Weaver, a dream devourer, guilt feeder, nightmare builder. And now, it wants Peter. Spiderman is about to face a force, not just from outside, but from within. This is no longer a battle of strength. It's a test of the soul, because in the world of dreams, webs don't always save you, sometimes they trap you. And while the city sleeps, the only hope left lies in a man who is beginning to doubt himself. Peter stood alone in the damp alleyway, just a few blocks away from his apartment. His suit clung to his skin, still wet from the night's rain. The sky above was a mass of unmoving gray clouds, as if something heavy pressed against the city's ceiling. He scanned the rooftops, but there were no muggers tonight. No cries for help, only silence. That was when he heard it, a soft chittering sound, high-pitched like thousands of tiny legs scuttling across metal. Then a whisper, not from around him, but inside his mask. "You're not the only one watching, Peter." He tore off the mask instantly, spinning to check behind him. No one, nothing, but the wall beside him, cracked. Long claw marks, fresh, still steaming. At 2:17 a.m., Peter returned home, heart still racing. He kept the lights off as he sat on the edge of his bed, the city lights flickering beyond the curtain. When he looked into the mirror across the room, he froze. His reflection blinked out of sync. He moved his hand. So did the reflection. But the eyes, they were wrong. Too wide, too still, too knowing. Then the reflection smiled. Peter didn't. The next morning, Peter dug through an old trunk at Aunt May's house. Old newspaper clippings, photos, letters. He was searching for something, he didn't even know what. That's when he saw it. A photograph of a man he didn't recognize, but who looked exactly like him. Written on the back, James Parker, 1897, lost in a dream. Peter didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the whisper returned. Not from the city, not from villains, but from the deepest place within his own mind. "Remember," the voice said. He didn't know what to remember, so he webbed across the city aimlessly, high above Manhattan, until the wind could barely touch him. From the top of an abandoned clock tower, he crouched alone, staring down at a city that had once been his home, but now felt foreign, empty. Then he saw it again. A shimmer, a shape that moved unnaturally across the windows of a distant building. Not crawling, gliding. It mirrored his movements, then stood still, watching. Peter tried to zoom in with his lenses, but the shape was gone. Only a faint outline on the glass, 8 long limbs, no face, no eyes, but it was watching him. He dropped down, followed the path across buildings, windows, rooftops. Nothing. no trace, until he arrived at an alley that looked wrong. It wasn't there yesterday, he was sure. The alley twisted unnaturally into the building, like it had been carved by something ancient. The walls were covered in webbing, but not his. These threads pulsed, almost breathing, slick and silver like something alive. He stepped forward. With every step, the sound of his heartbeat echoed louder. Then, something moved at the end of the corridor. Not fast, not aggressive, just waiting. Then it whispered, "Why do you fight what you are becoming?" Peter's breath hitched. He backed away, but the alley closed behind him, walls merging. The city outside was gone. The light was gone. All that remained was the web. Inside the webbed corridor, Peter's mask began to tighten. Not physically, but psychologically. He felt the pressure of something pushing from inside his mind, like a second consciousness clawing for space. His breathing grew ragged, and the mask's lenses flickered, distorting. Then a sound, not a whisper, but a voice, louder, deeper. "You created me," it said. Peter staggered backward, bumping into walls that pulsed like living muscle. "I'm not venom," the voice continued. "I'm not carnage. I'm what you buried when you chose control." Then a flash. The voice spoke through his own mouth, his own voice, but colder, emptier. Peter ripped off the mask, and for a moment, the reflection on the nearby glass wasn't his face. It had spider eyes, black, lidless. Its mouth grinned far too wide. And behind that smile, hunger. He fell to his knees. In that moment, Peter realized this wasn't an external enemy. It was something he'd left behind long ago, or thought he had. Peter managed to escape the corridor, but the city wasn't the same. The streets were too quiet. Neon signs flickered like failing heartbeats. Cars were frozen mid-turn, drivers unmoving. Pedestrians stood still, staring at him, their eyes empty, their mouths slightly open, as if about to scream. But they didn't. They only watched. As Peter swung through the city, buildings warped, bent inwards like they were leaning to listen. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. Everywhere he looked, there were webs, not his, but made of shimmering silver. In the center of every crossroad stood mirrors. Each time he passed, the mirrors reflected something different. Not himself, but versions of him. In one, he was monstrous. 8 limbs, dripping venom. In another, he wore a crown of webs ruling a dead city. He began to lose grip, his mind bent. He didn't know if he was awake or dreaming or trapped in someone else's nightmare. Then the voice returned, "This is the world you built to hide me in." And Peter screamed. Peter found himself standing in a chamber far below the city. No memory of how he got there. A cathedral of webs, white, endless, threads connected to nothing and everything. At the center stood a throne, twisted, black, alive. On it sat a version of himself, older, darker, smiling. "You always knew we'd meet again," it said. Peter approached slowly. His suit flickered between red and black. His hands trembled. "You're the part of me that you needed," the doppelganger finished. The other Peter rose from the throne, stepping forward. "You called me with your fear, fed me with your guilt, and now I'm strong enough to take back what I gave up." They stood face to face, the real and the forgotten. And for the first time, Peter realized he wasn't fighting a monster. He was fighting the version of himself that had chosen power without compassion, speed without restraint, strength without responsibility. The final battle wasn't above the city, it was beneath the spider. Morning light finally touched the rooftops of the city. But New York didn't cheer as it usually did. The city was still, like someone who had just awakened from a nightmare and wasn't sure if the dream had truly ended. Peter Parker stood at the edge of a familiar rooftop, the same one where he had watched over lives, hopes, and heartbreaks. The wind tugged at his disheveled hair. His red and blue suit, tattered, darkened with strange black residue, felt heavier than ever. He had returned, but not whole. That tunnel, that voice, that other version of himself, they were all still with him. Echoes in the corners of his mind. He knew the Weaver had been pushed back into the shadows, perhaps sealed, but never destroyed. Because something that ancient, that deeply rooted, couldn't be killed, only faced, and forgiven. and he had forgiven himself. For every mistake, for every life he couldn't save, for every fear he had buried instead of healing. Peter looked out across the city. It was still alive, still breathing, still needing him. But now he wore the mask not just to hide who he was, but to remember that even heroes can lose their way, that even strength needs vulnerability, that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to walk through it. As the bells of a distant church rang out across the early skyline, Peter jumped. His webs shot forth, clean, sharp, and sure, catching on steel. He swung forward, not faster, not harder, just freer. He was no longer afraid of the night, because he had walked through it and survived. And in the deepest part of that web, he had found the only light that mattered, the one within himself. And as he soared through the quiet city, a voice whispered softly in his mind, "You are not born of fear, Peter. You are the guardian of hope."